Well, we're recording now, but it's fine. Okay, so you can do the intro, and then I'll do our little thing here, and then there we go. All right, three. Let me get you count. Three.
Welcome to A and B Masterminds. I'm Alex Crowley.
Hello, I'm Bradley Moore, and we believe your purposeful and prosperous life is being stolen from you. Okay, by your need to be comfortable. Okay, intention is what's going to start you on the path to becoming a new person and having a new life, whatever that life is. Right. And we're
Right.
here to guide you there through interesting commentary of social parameters and events and all those exciting things. And today we've chosen, Mr. Crowley, since you chose, I'll let you explain.
Well, today we'll be talking about censorship. This is a actually pretty broad topic, to discuss. This is a topic that is not often, ironically, talked about in the major, media that we have in our country, which is America and other respective countries. But censorship has been very prevalent and it's been slowly, steadily growing in this country. And I just really want to raise awareness because I don't want us to be caught unawares when we just simply say that, today I want to wish my mom a happy birthday. And then 2 minutes later, the post gets taken down. And although that may sound very extreme and some would say even foolish to say, there are plenty of examples. Some we are going to show you and discuss with you all today how even the most simplest thing can be not only causing a person, excuse me, social media account to receive a strike or completely taken down, but how arguably most companies, especially social media ones, overstep their boundaries, not really relaying in their community guidelines how they go about what is allowed and really what isn't on their
Mm-hmm.
platform.
Yeah.
And some would even say that they actually don't have people in place to look after or watch and monitor what is being said, but they use an AI system to actually go through, and whatever the system picks up, it chooses to take it down, take a post down if it feels as though that community guidelines were violated. So we'll be talking about that today. I want to thank you all for clicking on this video. My name is Alex Crowley, and let's get started.
Okay, Alex. I don't know if you had any questions prepared, but we can just. I like to start off with the social media. I have a couple other topics that we can lead into later in terms of some other countries we'll talk about. Nobody
All right.
don't get too excited. Everyone, you know who we're talking
Right, right,
about, right? So
right.
I guess we can go ahead and if you have some questions or you want to lead off with the point, man, go ahead.
Well, you know what, I would actually, if you don't mind, I would like to start. I want to read you all an excerpt that I actually wrote, because this is something that I'm actually very passionate about. Censorship needs to be taken seriously. It needs to, be spoken about into to the masses, because this is something that we all could negatively be affected by if we continue to ignore what's in front of us, whether it's books being published, posts being made, or videos being put up. I just want you all to be aware and know that your rights could eventually be violated if we don't speak up and do something about it now. So I want to read you all this small piece of information that I had written down on my document. And then I will, Bradley, then ask you a question, and then we can begin to go deeper into this. So allow me to read this first, and then we can talk about it. So, you all, governments and social media companies have all, certain social media companies, certain governments, other platforms have been guilty of committing censorship. Now, I understand that they may say that what they're doing is not censorship, but they're trying to create a safe and healthy environment,
Right.
for their users on their platform. And I'm all for, a safe and healthy environment. But you have to understand that what exactly makes a safe and healthy environment if there's no freedom of speech involved? And freedom of speech is a very, I would almost say, a hostile topic to talk about right now in the United States of America, given the fact that you could almost argue that one isn't actually able to freely speak about how it is they feel about a particular group, individual, or company. China is another example, and I love the country. I love the culture. I'm learning the language, but they have been guilty, and they are very strict with how they, with what they allow. As far as internet access, given to their citizens, they don't really allow much over there. And please listen to this piece that I will read for you all. So, the United States government and the Chinese Communist Party, various African governments, and social media companies such as Facebook, which now goes by the name Metaverse, Twitter, and Instagram, have all been guilty of committing as censorship. Excuse me. According to a Forbes article, the author believes that all social media posts should be treated as a First Amendment right to freedom of speech. That author then states, and I will give you all the author's name at the end of this. The author then states that YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook don't precisely state in their community guidelines, and that's what I was talking about earlier. They do not precisely state in their community guidelines what their policies are on free speech. And you all can actually check this when you go on your social media app next time and do the research yourself. Now, I understand terms of service are changed all the time, but those are two different things. He then also states that these companies don't use many able bodies to find various speeches. So, what he's saying is that there's not an actual human being sitting behind a desk on a computer looking to see what is, what shouldn't, and what shouldn't be allowed on their platform. This could be deemed as an offensive language and misleading false information or hate speech. And what I'm saying by that, and they may sound like I'm talking in gaps, what the quote is saying here is that there is an AI system in artificial intelligence. If you're not, aware what AI means, that actually goes through the platform with a specific set of coding being put on to allow that is, excuse me, on that platform. Forgive me, you all. And with that coding, what it does is that it goes through the platform when people make a post. There's a video up, and us having common sense, you should know what shouldn't go on, a social media post. So nudity is a big one. Like, you shouldn't post a nude photo. But lately now we see that quote unquote soft porn is being allowed. Like, so as a man, I could probably post as an underwear model, and show like my crotch, but I couldn't just, pull my pants down and, post that on Instagram. I'd get taken down, right? But we've been seeing more soft porn, you could argue, as of late. And so, what this man is saying, you all, was that this could actually, and this probably is a bad thing because, well, the system is taking down posts that probably shouldn't be taken down. Another instance of this happening is when the COVID-19 pandemic was
Mm-hmm.
really warring through the United States of America from February 2020 all the way to December 2020. It was atrocious, it was tragic, and nobody knew that it was going to do the damage that it did until, things began to pick up and, despair was swept all across the country. This virus was terrible, but there were a lot of different people who had a lot, excuse me, to say about the coronavirus, where it derived from, who is immune to it, herd immunity. A lot of things were being discussed, and there were even, and there are reports of reputable scientists, medical doctors who gave their own opinion on about this, virus, and they were still being taken down. Some were even ostracized, and some even,
Yeah.
received death threats. And I'm not, a medical health expert. I am not, sophisticated in the ways of medical science. So I'm not an expert on, viruses. But one thing I can say is that, if we are so quick as a country to silence our medical professionals when there's a public health crisis going on in this country that turns into a pandemic and affects this whole world, what are we to do and who could we look to for answers if our very own doctors are, not allowed to use their voices on social media. And so that's what we're talking about on today because we don't want the wrong people or the right information, uh, excuse me, the right people and the right information to be took down and trade that for some they call misinformation, which is very prevalent
Mm-hmm.
and travels very fast throughout social media. And
Couldn't
if
that
you,
be an argument that they use though? We're taking all of, we don't allow any COVID stuff unless it's from like a reputable news source. It's like if you look on YouTube, there's like a little section where like CNN and CSBC or whatever it is have all the little reels, and then they have like a Fauci report or whatever. So
mhm.
do you think that that's an argument that can be superseded? Like, because if I'm YouTube and you say that to me, hey, you're impeding on freedom of speech because you're not allowing the doctors to speak, and then YouTube says, well, they're not an accredited, you know what I mean? They can kind of litigate that however they want, but at the same time, they have a good foot to stand on in saying we don't want anyone but the government or the CDC or WHO to actually make comments or videos. And if we allow one person to do it, how can we? You know what I mean? And then they would probably lead into the whole argument with like the one family that drank the it's like I can't remember what it was, but it was like fishbowl cleaner or something like that. No, I can't remember. You don't remember that? That was out in like
I,
Arizona. You know what I mean? It was
they
like right
thought
when
that
Trump was talking about like,
hydroxychloroquine
yeah,
or
he's like, we're just could we just pour some in and bleach it or like,
oh
yeah,
disinfectant,
yeah, yeah.
there will be a cleaning. Yeah, I remember that. It's kind of sad though, man. It's kind of
Oh
sad that
wow! But wouldn't you think?
mhm.
Don't you think that's a good argument though? I mean, I know it's hilarious.
That's a
I'm
fair
not
argument.
laughing at those people. Obviously, I'm
I
sorry
know.
to hear that.
Mhm.
But just in general, that whole farce. Like, how much more of that would we see though? Arguably, if we didn't just say, okay, we got to cut it off. It's got to be a reputable organization, right?
You're correct. That's a pretty fair argument, and I want to also add, Bradley, that you know personal wisdom should come into play, right?
Mm-hmm.
One should know how to use judgment in situations when you hear a public
Yeah.
servant get in front of the nation and say that maybe we should try and drink and swallow down disinfectant. You should know like that is what we use to wipe and clean
mm-hmm.
surfaces, toilets and such as that. You That's not meant to be swallowed or
Mm-hmm.
chugged down like a gallon of water. So um with that, I just would have to really attribute people who follow such directions is kind of falling for, them they're where they were naive to believe that, and foolishness is also involved. And
Yeah.
I'm not quick to call people foolish, but that is foolishness, pure foolishness. It's nonsense. Listen, uh, what you said was correct, but we have to be aware that, listen, when something like that, and I don't want to get too deep into COVID because this is about censorship, but when something like that, such as a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, is taking place, it is obvious that a lot of people have their own thoughts and opinions on what is happening, who is affected, and what can be done about it to fight against it in a person's immune system, or how to prevent it before it actually enters into your own system. And so, with that being said, Bradley, companies have to understand that we have a voice and we should be allowed to use it.
Mm-hmm.
What should be taken down is something like that, like swallow disinfected. But when you have a code already set in place that predetermines what stays up and what doesn't, how accurate is this, artificial intelligence when it, makes a judgment on what should be allowed to stay up and what shouldn't. And I know that not everything can be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
but I do know that it's still flawed. It is.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree that there's flaws. I think the issue comes from first we got to think about manpower. I don't know what these companies are generating in terms of revenue, but you can imagine having to hire. I mean, I who knows what it would take to curate the comments on YouTube or something like that, right? An actual
Right.
employee base. Like, I mean, there's plenty of podcasts and stuff I've listened to where they talk about like Jack Dorsey was on with Joe, and he talked about it's just not going to be possible to hire enough people to. It's just, I mean, there's billions of comments
And I
total,
understand
right?
that they
So in
want to
that
be
regard,
efficient. Yeah.
yeah, it's tough. Like I get both positions here. I do agree that freedom of speech is because I was on your side definitely full scale, and I still am originally in the way of I think we need to protect that right, and if social media is going to involve themselves in culture and they're going to involve themselves in our personal like and provide us a platform, yes they have to curate it, but I also believe we have to have some sort of I mean they're doing their best, right? I guess a lot of people would argue no, they're mega corporations with, but I mean corporations have operating costs is a huge part of it as well. And also, if you don't like it, just don't use the service, right? That's mainly. I mean, I haven't used social media since I was mostly because I didn't really wasn't good at it. So don't let me hide from that. But and the other reason is just I don't agree with the like they make a lot of money off your information, which I mean I get it. It's for terms of service. I don't read them either, but at the same time, I just don't. I make the decision to not allow my information to even be out there in the first place for the most part. Like we're gonna make some business accounts, right? I have Facebook and stuff now, but I'm not gonna be out there posting and looking at ads and just generating a lot of data on there, right? And I'm sure there's five tech people that are watching this like, well, you don't understand. They're taking everything right now. And I get that,
Right.
but I think that we just have to. It was a tough one, man. It's a tough one because the second I say you have to give up something, yet, but at the same time, I think it's best to just say don't use it if you don't agree with because eventually if we get to the point where as a person as an individual you say okay I'm not going to use this service because I don't agree with it or I'm not going to buy five cell phones I'm not going to upgrade my cell phone every 2 years because there is an actual like diamond mine somewhere that's someone's being what I mean these things exist I'm not going to like Sarah McLaughlin, you guys, and be like, every winter, thousands of dogs are left homeless. The ASPCA lady. But I think it's good to talk about these things because we do need to bring out the censorship is a problem. I mean,
Yeah.
China has a huge problem with censorship. I was just looking at they're taking down the Pillar of Shame, which was essentially it's just a monument to the Tiananmen Square. I mean, they're literally trying to censor out their wrongdoings, right? And I think another point to add is in the school systems how I don't know how prevalent this is anymore, but they're like wanting to not teach World War II, like the actual dark moments of it in terms of the Holocaust, and they want to take out like teaching about the Nazis and all that. And they're arguing. Well, I mean, this is probably some radical people. I haven't heard about this in a while, but as an example, I know it does happen, right?
Right.
For instance, I saw another story that was recent. I can't remember the state, but some kids found in their school library there was a book that had basically an anal sex scene in it, and the mom was like, "I've never tried that. I don't want my kids to try it." Blah blah blah, etc. etc. So that's a really good point, right? That's almost the same regard. It's like, do we limit the children who can handle that? I don't know what grade this was in. If it's fourth grade, obviously it's a bad deal. But if it's
So
high school,
it was a book that
in the school
each
library, yeah, I think.
that had to do with they talked in the book talked about anal sex. You said.
Yeah, but it was probably I think it was like a narrative. It wasn't like the art of anal sex by James
Mhm.
Madison. It was probably just like a scene in a book where they it's probably like 2 pages or something if that to deal
Okay.
with it. You know what I mean? Just a book like that. But she was I mean it's I think put it to a vote at the end of the day, but I think those things are kind of linear in terms of that's a tough one, right? So I don't
It's
know if you yeah, that's a tough one. I mean,
it's yeah.
they
Um.
yeah, I'll let you go
Well.
ahead. I don't want to write on too long on that point because I was getting.
Well. And it's not just about the anal sex scene in the book. It's just when a parent hears that their son or
Mm-hmm.
daughter read a book at school and it contains adult material. And listen, I mean, by the time a young man or a woman gets to high school, they should have already had the sex talk. So I highly doubt that the
Right.
young students, you know what I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
highly doubt that they were foreign to what anal sex is or what sex is, period. As to the mom stating that she's never had anal sex, I believe that that shouldn't have been said at all. Because we didn't ask you, mom, if you've ever had.
I
You know
agreed
what I
with
mean?
that. It was almost like you're just being
Yeah,
dramatic. Like
yeah,
we get it. Like, let's
No,
vote to
nobody's
take the book
accusing you,
down.
mom.
Right.
Yeah,
Like,
no, nobody's accusing you, mom, of having anal sex. And if you are,
yeah.
please keep it to yourself and between you and your husband or whoever. But you know what I mean. So with that to the side though, Bradley, I can see why a parent would want books like that to not be allowed in school library, excuse me. And this is another form of censorship because what if what if that book was Shakespeare's Macbeth? What if that scene
Hmm.
was also in Romeo and Juliet? And I like Macbeth better than Romeo and Juliet, but these are pieces of literature that are, I would say, pretty interesting and very important for a student in high school to learn. And although that that specific scene may be graphic, it's not like we can put everything to a vote, but the author should still be allowed when they publish their book for it to be on shelves. Should it be in schools? That's up, that's debatable.
Right.
Should it be in that school? That's the choice that they need to make.
Hmm.
But somebody gave the okay for that book to show up, in that library.
That's
You
the
get
point
what
I
I'm
was going to
saying?
make for you.
Yeah,
So, I guess what I'm going to say in a nutshell is, do
yeah.
you think that at in a longevity term point of view, perhaps the unwillingness to teach in a mature way, or perhaps like for instance, this woman, I don't know her name or anything, and there's no need to say it, but like for her personally, do you think her inability to have this conversation with her children is kind of her like that's on you at this point? Like for instance, if I raise a child and I mean I'm not saying I'm going to be sweet at it or whatever, but it just there's plenty of kids that are in high school that can handle hearing about anal sex, you know what I mean, or read
Of
it in a
course,
book
of
by
course.
themselves in their room and go hee hee hee, or you know what I mean, do have whatever reaction, but be able to like go eat dinner and not be like, Mom, today I got to tell you, it really, you know what I mean? It's not going to end their whole career. So from that perspective, do you think the mom, or do you think I shouldn't say, let's just say parents in general, should we perhaps push in our society to have less censorship in a sort of scholastic creative way, like because I think that like with the not teaching the World War II points and interests in terms of the Nazis and stuff like that, and this is that linear parallel here. Like, at what point do we say, okay, we need to just figure out a way to teach our children to handle this information more maturely, right? Or raise them not quickly, nor quickly, but what are the things that we're doing as parents in a society that are holding our children back from being able to read that at an appropriate age, right? If you're 15 years old, you should well understand how anatomy works, and trust me, parents, they're figuring it out. You know this. You've done this. You know what I'm saying? Like I just had this. I'm not gonna say who in my family because I don't want to out them like that. But I have nephews and nieces, and one of the nephews is getting to that age, and I keep what I mean. I'm like, hey, listen, there's private areas for that. But one thing that I've been very careful about is I'm not trying to like, hey, don't do that. You know what I mean? I want him to make sure that like, hey, if you need to do that, man, if you want to explore that,
You
go.
want him to be responsible.
Right, head in the
Yeah.
bathroom. Hit me up after. We can talk about how to deal with these things in class. And and I told him like about how in middle school I used to get what do you call it, morning one on the bus every day. I'm like, it's normal. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, you're gonna have problems that come with it. So I don't want it to be like a foreign. I don't want to censor it from him. But at the same time, I don't want him watching, Pornhub on on the daily to like
Well,
explore it.
right, right. Well, Bradley, whatever can be censored on the internet or at school can still be taught through word of mouth at home
Yeah.
or through peers, that you have at school or outside of school. So let's not act like, and I'm not saying you're doing this,
Mm-hmm.
but for parents and faculty, whoever, let's not act like that. There's not other ways to find out about something that
Right.
has been snatched from you or barred from being viewed, at the internet. And school systems do have parental controls and certain website blockages in place so that students don't get too curious or too excited and just try and, I guess, carte blanche, go on the internet, go on google.com and then search, what is that, what does anal sex look like or something like that. But going back to censorship and tying this in together, if that's the mom's reaction, or even though the kids didn't act like that, mom may need to have a more of an adult conversation with her kids and whoever else's kids were involved. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
Um, Also, the school, eh, when I was in school, during my health class, Bradley, and I don't know how other health teachers, teach their students about sex, but you would almost argue there was no censorship in that health class. Whatever
Mm-hmm.
question you had, it was getting answered. Whatever you didn't know about, you were going to know about. And I'm not even just talking about sex. Everything isn't about sex when we talk about health. It's anything.
Right.
If you know what I mean? So you were going to learn about it. So if a kid is not able to handle that type of information, they are young. Some kids laugh when they hear stuff like that. They get excited, or some, you know what I mean? They go like, "Oh, you shouldn't be saying that," or
Would
but
would you say that though? I think that could be probably attributed to the fact that there's no exposure to it, right? So it's just a little like hidden, like he. Mommy blushes when
right,
daddy talks about that, or something like that. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
eh,
Well, yeah, I
there's got
mean,
to be a better way to like, you know what I mean? Because as a kid, it was so weird, and like you'd see like little things on TV at night when you're going to sleep, where like nothing weird, but like you would just see like a lingerie ad or a girl in a bikini, or for a guy, or girls too. But you get what I'm saying, and you'd be like, "What's this weird feeling inside?" But instead, you're
right,
like, you don't want to go bring that up because then they're gonna be like, "What were you watching?" Instead of, "Well, tell me how that makes you feel." You know what I mean? And that was at least my personal experience, which it's probably pretty typical in America, right? Because it's just weird to talk about, right? I've kind of avoided it wholesale with him for now because he's only 10, so I kind of just, if you have questions, hit me up. And I'm just watching him to make sure he doesn't get in anything that he's not ready for. But as far as like, I mean, Dindlin is, the little fire starter going on. Let the band work. Because I don't think that I need to really get involved in. He's going to come when he's ready for questions, right? Because once he starts looking at girls and he's like realizes, wait a minute, that's the stimulus. Whoa, whoa, or maybe it might be guys for him. Who knows? But he'll cut. You know what I mean? He'll come with questions when he needs to hunt, when he's ready to hunt. You know what I mean? But at what point do I stop censoring him? You know what I mean? I'm finding that it might be a little earlier, and I'm not saying like you just go like read him the Tantra Sutra, right, and teach him how teach him all 800 positions or
every
something.
position, yeah,
But I mean, it just have the conversation, once every few months. Hey, man, if there's anything going on in terms of you growing up and maturing, you know what I mean. And kids know you. I mean, you don't have to be so forward about it, and then just leave it. I think because if you plant the seed, they'll water it themselves, and you can walk by and be like, whoa, but hey, close the door next time or whatever. It's I think those little censorship boundaries kind of cut themselves off almost when they're ready. So that's the problem I think that we need to address is how do we teach parents to notice those little signs where they're getting those things are getting watered and need trimmed, so they don't turn into a weed and they can be a beautiful flower or whatever. That's a good metaphor to use instead of wanking your panky, right? But
so
yeah, what do you think? Is there like for you? Was there places you could have been like, "Mom, now's a good time," or do you think there's places culture do we over sexualize things and so it's so hyper you don't even want to ask about it? I know that was one of the things for me, the pressure to have an attractive girlfriend or
right.
be
Well,
attractive.
yeah, so just growing up, if you would have grown up with me, my mom is a very straightforward woman, so there she doesn't really uh, listen. We've always had mature
Right,
conversations. My mom's a very straightforward woman. She still allowed me to be a kid when I was a kid, but when it was time for me to, you know, go into adolescence, she
right,
spoke to me like a young man. So it's just there was no childishness involved. There was no anything coming to her as a shock if I had a question, and she also wasn't desensitized, so it's not like she just didn't have any emotions towards my curiosity or me being caught reading or looking at something that maybe I probably shouldn't have read or looked at. But there was like no shame or any surprise. We had conversations about
right.
it. And I learned things new, and I learned some things to stay away from, and I learned other things about myself as me being a young man at that time, and how the opposite gender is and how they operate. But we are also speaking about censorship on a very minimal level. That's like at the home and school level. I want to get back on the more broader topic on
Right.
censorship. I remember talking about how social media companies act. How do you feel about the social media companies, and what is your stance on governments using censorship, as some argue that it is a form of control and also propaganda, keeping their people in the dark? So go ahead, Bradley. Let me know your thoughts.
Interestingly enough, I was doing some. I always like to do a little devil's advocate research, and so from the perspective of positive censorship, I think that's kind of what I was leading into with that conversation is the balance of negative and positive censorship on a level everyone can understand has been through, right? Because everyone goes through puberty. I mean, not everyone, but to those few people, I'm very sorry, but you get the point. The large majority of us have had that experience, right? So, um, to that regard, I think something that was pointed out when I was looking at an article that talked about protecting democracy, right?
Right.
And part of protecting democracy is making sure we don't get oversaturated in violence on TV or something, right? Would completely agree with someone if they said oversaturation of violence in every TV show is probably a bad thing. It's going to produce tendency to maybe not fight. I'm not one of those like playing video games makes you violent person because I play video games and a lot in my life when I was younger, especially. And I'm not necessarily violent. I think that can definitely factor in, but in terms of full scale censorship, oh man, it's tough, right? Because there is the need to keep, some sort of propaganda base out of media, right? But at the same time, you have the capitalistic perspective where censorship is kind of pushed back, right? We need to be able to make marketing ads that are effective. We need to be able to um, have effective ways to explain medicine, but also sell the medicine. You know what I mean? I know that's a marketing ad. I'm looking for another example, but it, we can have certain things on the side of a bus, but you can't have. Most people don't advertise porn on the side of a bus because you need to censor. You know what I mean? So you have those little fine lines where I think culture kind of rings that out itself. But on the broader scale, I think what you're talking about is like ad censorship, and I think all this comes from the moral censorship in a micro level, but also what's the moral censorship of a macro governmental level, right? So, for instance, when you look at the Chinese censorship levels versus the American censorship levels, I mean, they have like a social score now and all that. I haven't really done the research into that to see if that actually got instituted and all that and how that's going. But I know that looking at the Beijing things that we're talking about, and or we were talking about earlier, how Beijing's kind of taking Hong Kong back and they're getting rid of all the like the pillar of shame and censoring all those things that lead to the macro censorship that allows you to kind of say no, this never happened, right? Like they deny, what is it, Taiwan? They're like, no, no, Taiwan doesn't exist, we own it. They're like, no, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So
They wanted to, reunite with the mainland. Yeah.
I mean, see, that's my whole thing is like I think over censorship will cause that, right? Because I suppose I mean, you'd really take some good scientific data to really have a fine line on like here's the right censorship, right? I think we have a good mix of it here. Earlier, I would say, like earlier we do a really good job, and then once we get around teenage years, we're like we have no idea what we're doing. We kind of just figure it out ourselves. Blah blah blah. Then you hit 20, and then you have like another oversaturation of it where it's these marketing ads like you go into the political, not political, I'm sorry, like you get out of school and college, you go into the professional environment, and then you're super censored, you wear the tight suit and all that, which is necessary for work function, etc. So there's like I think each society has their own balance, right? And
Right.
from the Chinese perspective, they do a great job early on, and then they never stop doing a great job, right?
Hmm.
And by that I mean they don't get like the formative years. I think that's the big thing in Hong Kong that they took down some teachers unions as well, or not teachers unions, but I think it was like a student or a university union. Basically, they're taking away rights for expression and using that as like a stronghold grip on Hong Kong and trying to really force their culture back in there in a censorship styled way, right? Like taking away that monument. And I know that they have like a vigil they do every year. They took that away. Basically, they're taking away everything that reminds Hong Kong that Hong Kong had that individual out. Like I don't know the culture per se, but I know that the Chinese spirit is still strong in Hong Kong. Like, it's not like a British colony by any means. Like they're like the vigil of Chinese creativity in terms of like they're trying to keep out whatever censorship that the mainland, well, not mainland, but whatever the broader Chinese province has
Right.
had. And so when you
Yeah.
the fine line is really hard to draw. I mean, I can't get to it. It take some time to think about it, right? But I think that self censorship comes into it, right? I mean, you learn that as a kid. It's difficult to say. Like everyone learns it differently, right? So, like our country has like a really like a very like a multiverse of censorship, right? You got like kids in school that are cussing at age 12, and you've got kids in school. I don't know how that is in China and other countries. I'm sure it's the same, but I think we have like a higher tolerance for it. More say like maybe not so instant, not in like a ignorant way, like someone just walking around cussing, but we let people like we oh that's just Johnny, right? Like Johnny's really individual. He likes to scream about this in the hallways, which is weird and loud. We don't like it, but we like the fact that Johnny's being Johnny because we know that Johnny has differences, individualism, etc. Right? So you have that micro censorship where, on the cultural level, we do all that. But in China, I don't know their culture very well in terms of on a personal level, but it doesn't seem like that's very. Most Asiatic countries like Japan, I know they're very professional in terms of how they meet each other in public, and they're very respectful, and you're not going to see someone like walking out of a job interview and like, yeah, you know what I mean, that expressive like individualistic not charm, but the micro portion is taken away. But on the macro portion in those kind of countries, you see that censorship is almost, you know what I mean? You get what I'm trying to say? Like the mushroom top of censorship isn't there. Like the Chinese government is like, no, we don't censor anyone. We just make sure we're protecting democracy. And so, to your point, I think it lies on us and shows like this and people like that have big audiences to talk about it and allow us to express our opinion. Right?
Right.
They can listen to another show and a couple hundred other shows that are uncensored because of YouTube. And see, this is why I don't like to shit on the social media companies, because look at what we're trying to do with it, right? And
Right.
as long as we are intelligent and use our brains correctly and edit out stupid shit and learn and grow 5% better each time, we shouldn't ever get censored, right?
Correct.
And I guarantee if we get censored, we'll probably go back and see, you and I personally would. I don't think we would produce some like we would know if it would be like, oh, we said something really stupid. I can't believe we didn't catch that.
Yeah, I don't think we would produce censorship material
Right.
type of videos. Yeah.
But I think it's on us to actually push, and that's why I love Joe Rogan's show. Not to like, you know, fan grab or anything, but just because all the comics he has on there, like that's something they talk about a lot. Is like that's the job of people, the creative person in society that's not going to the 9 to 5 and doing the health insurance gig or whatever. Whatever's your thing is your thing, right? I'm not hating on those people, but it's us to the people who are up there talking about anal sex on stage at 21 to push those boundaries so that way we never forget, like, hey, look at the other side. Look at the other side of the world, right? We don't want to
Right.
go that far with it. So
Right.
that's why I say it's up to us and it's up to the mamas who don't want anal sex to be taught to get your kids acclimated to that. Get yourself acclimated to that so you can handle that, right? So you have the responsibility. So when your kid says, "Mom, I had this," like you don't go, "Rah, the school systems." You know what I mean? You go, "Okay, let's sit down. Let's learn and grow from this. How do you feel about it? Did it really bother you and affect you that heavily? Okay, let's go to school. We'll have a chat with your teacher." You know what I mean? And I get it's the mama bear aspect, and I don't know the whole story, but I think that's things like this, especially with the extreme on both sides, right and left culture. I think those little incidences where we try to force the system to over censor for us our lack of ability and or want to teach or mature our children is where we lose our rights, right? So like you say, like we talked about in China, like Hong Kong is like, no, you're not going to censor us at all, at all. And in America, this lady's like, literally censor this out of, you know what I mean? So it's like that weird multiverse where people are just not even like looking over the waters and see what I mean. I think they would find that she would find more value in having that available material in the school if she saw, you know what I mean. I think we've gotten so far away from strife in this country, man. I mean, we're living so comfortable, and I don't speak for everybody, but to cut off a long draw, I mean, we just need to be responsible, right? We
Right.
need to have this conversation. What is and introduce it early enough to where before you're 20, you don't get fully censored. Like your creativity doesn't get censored, right? Your
Right.
imagination doesn't get censored. Like,
Correct.
I mean, we talked about this in another episode. I think my imagination is half the reason I can understand math. You know what I mean? So we don't need to over censor or under censor. We have to continuously talk. We have to continuously balance, and we have to continuously allow the freedom of speech. And like, people are not unable to, like, if someone says something outrageous or silly, they're going to censor them themselves simply by ignoring them, right? I think that's an important thing
Right.
to let people say stupid things, right?
So do you okay, so with all that being said, right? I want to ask you, where do you feel as though the future of freedom of speech will end up in this country? As I still feel as though that it is in danger.
Mm-hmm. No, I
And I
agree.
feel as though that we are on the decline as far as our freedom of speech, all of our freedoms being able to still be respected in this country.
Yeah.
And I do know that as long as the Constitution stands, no one can really take that away. But you know what they say, what comes after democracy, right?
Mm-hmm. We saw
Tyranny.
that, and we
So
saw that in Greece.
exactly. So I just want to know, like, and it happened in Rome as well. They
Yeah,
went from a
yeah.
republic to a what?
Tyranny. Well,
They had emperors, right?
yeah.
So I mean, it's absolute power, really. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel about that? I mean, are you worried about your freedom of speech? Do you feel
Mm-hmm.
as though that maybe in the year 2045 you won't be able to say the same things that you can say in the year 2021? I mean, how do you feel about that? Are you worried at all? Are you concerned? Are you kind of going with the flow?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, where are you at with that personally?
Okay.
What's the last
Personally,
thing? Yeah,
I I mean that's partly why we're doing this, right? Is
right,
because I have the same. I mean, I have my own take on it, right? I think that the individual person, should start to take more responsibility for their life, etc. Reel on about it all the time.
right.
But the future, it's like in terms of that's why we have to value the community because it will be taken away. It will hinder. Well, I undoubtedly feel that way, and not because I'm just some like mega genius or I've studied so much. It's just like that's just human. It's just like duh. Like we can see the like that's why we have history. It's his or her story of how we fucked up, right? Like that's why it's there, so we don't repeat it, so we can learn from it. And when we just, I mean, look how easy it was for us to. We don't know Greek or Latin. We've never studied it. We've had one philosophy class together. I've only had like four philosophy classes, and we all know, what happened there. People got really egocentric. They got really power hungry, and they got tyrannical. They started censoring everyone so that they could keep the power. So when we talk about social media companies, I do think it's very important to, like, for instance, that's why I don't use Twitter. I will never use Twitter.
Hmm.
I just there's just not only that, but like there's just can't be that much intelligence you can get out in 280 characters. And I know you can, or what is was it a limit? It's like 140 characters or something.
Yeah, it's not very long, and also, you still can't even really edit your post. There's no edit option. There's
See,
no edit option at all.
see,
which,
that's so
which has been
interesting too.
widely talked about. Go
That's like
ahead.
a self censorship on its own, right? Because the second you say something that you can't retort. Like you have to make a new tweet real quick. Oh, my bad, I didn't mean that. Like, and by the time you do that, you could have went into work for 8 hours, and the 60 people
Went
in your
viral.
life that you care about now think you're some, and you're like, no, that was just some understanding, blah blah blah. Or maybe you did mean it, and now you're like, oh wow, good thing for this freedom of speech thing. I didn't even think about all the hundreds of angles of this. See, and that's one of the things with the cyber age, man. Like we don't interact as much anymore with COVID, especially. Like you don't get to see that look on someone's face when you call them stupid and you're like, oh, you know what I mean? And it doesn't, we're not getting that same emotional training. And so it has to be done. Like by the time we get old enough and we go onto the real world, like college, and the people are there are like, you're fucking stupid. No, like I'm not going to give up my freedom of speech because you want a specific pronoun. Like I don't mind to call you that if you ask me personally, but you know what I mean? I'm like, you're not going to over legislate some sort of form of censorship because, and that's where we tie it all in, right? That person didn't take personal responsibility, or maybe their parents didn't give them the rigor that it takes to hear someone say. I heard Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about this on Impact Theory with Tom Bilyeu, which is a show I love, right? He
Is
was
that
talking,
the actual physicist?
yeah, and he was
Okay.
talking about he doesn't hear the term "sticks and stones may break my bones" very much anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which could be a good thing. And he said this himself. He's not sure. I mean, whether it's good or bad ultimately, because I mean, I said that so much, and I mean, I got plenty of things called to me. You know what I mean? But maybe that help. I don't know where I'd be at if I didn't have that to go home and hear my dad say, yeah, "People are gonna call you shit all the time, son." You know what I mean? Because like I notice as I watch my nephews growing up, like they model like your reaction. Even like kids model your reaction. So when you react so heavily to this, like, oh, they said this to me, and or the, for instance, with the um, teenage years, right? Like if you overreact to those hormonal, you know, like any like catching people masturbate or anything like that, you're censoring it, but you're also planting the seed of self censorship, right? And so once you get to college and you break out and you dye your hair purple, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I told myself not to say it. Not everyone dyes their hair purple is bad. I'm sorry for saying that. But you get my point. It's like there's a certain type of people. It's like you can tell there wasn't enough exposure, right? They were over censored.
Mm-hmm.
And so now they want to over censor the environment to protect that over censored. And this is really sensitive language, right? I'm trying really hard here, but I mean, that's just, if you want to look at it in sort of like a chronological order, like you grow up with heavy censorship, you don't get to, you know what I mean? We've outlined the whole process. I think we've taken this talk almost full circle at this point, right? Like you can see where the problem develops culturally at the center. Like we need to just be adults and fucking teach our kids about anal sex when they're old enough to understand it, because they are going to get exposed to it. You don't have to teach them, you know, like the maximum pleasure to it or whatever aspects of it you find. You can even teach them that you think it's wrong, but it exists. You know what I mean? You can't hide it. And when you hide it like that, you censor it and you make it like a little gem, right?
Right.
So if we don't change that aspect, I think in the future we're going to just see more censorship. We're going to want more of Big Brother to come in and get the book off the shelf for us, or over legislate the college blanking on the word, but the facilities or the grounds, the college grounds, and whatever universities you go to are becoming more and more constricted on what you could say and how you can express yourself, and the teachers are getting fired, and the kids are like chasing people around with bats and shit, and they're still allowed to come back to class. But you see what I mean? It's like it's an over censorship unless you're saying what I think is right. You know what I mean? You could see the whole, like, and much more intellectually adept people have stated this on much more widely watched podcasts than me, right?
Right.
So to answer your question fully, yes, there's always going to be that threat whether we do our part or not, but shouldn't we be more vigilant then? Shouldn't we do more uncensored? Shouldn't we be personally accumulating the ability to respond that to when our kids need that response, so they can then model that behavior and be more mature about it? Like you say, like you were like, your mom probably sat you down and said that thing will get you in trouble. Like my dad, like my birds and the bees talk, I'd had sex like 50 times already with my girlfriend, and he like grabbed my dick one day when I was walking out of the porch, like son, this will get you in trouble. Like I was leaving to go to her house from grandma's. Like, but that's because he didn't know what to do. You know what I mean? Like that's the last ditch effort of a father who does not understand how to give the birds and bees talk. He's like, I can't let my son get pregnant, but I have no idea what to say to him. So I'm walking out, and he just cups my whole package, and he's like, this thing right here, son, this will get you in a lot of trouble. He's like, you better watch it. And I was like, oh my God, Dad knows I'm having sex. But you know what I mean? It's like that right there, that over censorship was so unnecessary. But that's because he probably got the same thing. His he like my grandpa had 10 brothers. Okay, my dad knows that that thing is used for something. You know what I mean? And his dad probably had the
Right.
same talk. And he's like, "Fuck, I gotta do it. I don't know how to do this shit. I work all day to keep this kid
So he just
alive."
grabs your crotch on
the
your way
whole
out the
the whole
door.
thing, dude. He was like, "Listen, son, this thing right here will get you in a lot of trouble if you don't watch it." I was like, "Oh." I was like, "Dad, you
So
can't do
glad I didn't
it."
have to go through that.
I
I'm so
know, and that's where I'll end my tirade. But like, don't let that be. I don't blame Dad for that. You
Our
know what I
next
mean? But
episode should be on keeping your hands to yourself.
hey, that's don't
Oh
censor me,
man.
Alex. I
Oh
don't
man,
know,
that's
man.
great.
But that's a good place to end it. But I mean, at the end of the day,
Yeah,
people just have the conversation. I think just communication is really what this comes down to, right? Like, and that's what they're trying to do in Hong Kong. They're trying to stop communication. They're trying to stop people
correct.
from seeing the
Correct.
things that get them to think, to get them to communicate. I mean, we've seen this play out, and that's why I say don't over censor the schools because kids need to read about people who are in even if they can't really understand it yet, they need to know that it's possible to censor an entire country to the point where they literally just start murdering millions and millions of their own citizens for a completely like methadone. I'm pretty sure Hitler was like on some sort of like morphine or some shit. Like he was like hallucinating. He had like I don't know. You get the point. Let's not get too deep in the weeds with him. The guy was clearly unhealthy in the brain, but he's he censored the right things and you know what I mean? He played that tool correctly. So we need to have the personal responsibility to where you and I can sit down and say, "Hey Alex, we got a problem about censorship. Let's talk about it." And my idea might be a shitty one, yours might be a shitty one, or that we could be geniuses, right? But it's relative, and we need to have more
Possibly.
conversations, and we need to
Yeah.
just have the real experience in our lives, and don't be afraid, and have that courage to go say, we need to talk about this, or we need to maybe not talk about this.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know what you think about that, but
Well, overall, you've hit every point. As you know, we wanted to make sure that people were aware of what has been going on, what currently is going on, and what will continue to go on. And let's be honest, there is strength in numbers,
yeah,
but who's to say that anybody will still listen? You know what I mean? So you have to still prepare yourself not only individually but possibly, and I really do believe that you should prepare others, excuse me, for what's up ahead. I want to thank you all today for clicking on this you know episode of
thank
A
you.
and B Mastering the Mind. I'm still laughing at Bradley's story about his dad,
Hey, listen,
grabbing
that's the comedic
him.
relief for the episode right there. That's what's gonna get the likes. We should put that's gonna be at the beginning. You know what I mean? That little reel at the beginning, the little B-roll.
Yeah, so that was a funny little story. I want to thank you all for clicking on this episode. If you all have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave a comment. Please drop a comment or email Bradley. His email will be in the description box. Make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you guys. Have the talk. Don't grab the crotch.